Officer Jake Miller was the type of man who gave law enforcement a good name, calm under pressure, kind to strangers, and fiercely protective of his team. Jake had become a respected figure at the precinct over his 10-year career. He was someone everyone trusted on the job and off it. He had never missed a shift, never failed to respond to a call, and never left anyone waiting. So when he didn't return from a routine solo patrol through Pinewood Forest, it sent a chill through the entire department. That morning had started like any other. Jake had arrived early, smiling, with a hot cup of coffee in one hand and a quiet joke for the rookie officers. The team had been running a series of patrols in the outer woods due to reports of trespassers and strange activity near the nature reserve. Jake volunteered to take the midday shift through the deeper section of the forest trail, a place he had patrolled many times before. He loaded up his vehicle, radioed his route, and drove off with his loyal K9 partner Max riding beside him in the back. By 3 p.m., Jake was supposed to have checked in when the radio stayed silent. Dispatch tried to reach him, no response. At first, they assumed he was in a dead zone common in the denser parts of the forest. But as more time passed, a nervous tension began to build. Officer Lena Grant, who was training in the K9 unit, felt something was off. She looked at Max, who was now pacing back and forth in his kennel, unusually restless. By sunset, the department had mobilized a full search. Officers spread out along Jake's patrol route, combing trails and using all-terrain vehicles to cover rougher ground. Helicopters joined in, scanning the treetops with thermal cameras. The entire community came together: volunteers, firefighters, park rangers, all looking for a man who had never needed help until now. But Max was growing more and more agitated by the hour. He barked at every sound, pulled at his leash, and scratched at the doors of Jake's empty patrol vehicle. Lena, who had known Jake and Max both for years, noticed how different Max's behavior was. He wasn't confused. He wasn't scared. He was trying to tell them something. "I think he knows where to go," Lena said to the search supervisor. "He's not panicking. He's pulling toward a direction." The supervisor hesitated. Max was trained in search and rescue, but protocol required handlers to stick to assigned sectors. Still, with time running out and temperatures dropping fast, they made a judgment call. "Let's see what he knows," the supervisor finally said, with her heart pounding. Lena unclipped Max's leash and gave him the command, "Find Jake." What happened next stunned everyone. Max didn't hesitate. The moment he was free, he bolted into the trees, not in a frantic dash, but with the focused determination of a dog on a mission. His nose stayed low to the ground, his ears twitched at every sound, and his body moved with urgency. He paused briefly, sniffed, then changed direction sharply, heading into an unmarked part of the forest few officers had ever stepped into. Lena followed, calling in her location as she chased after him. All she could think about was one thing. Max wasn't just searching randomly. He wasn't chasing a trail like a normal tracker. He was following something deeper, a bond, a connection, and in that moment, Lena realized something powerful. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a story about loyalty, about a partner who refused to give up, and about a dog who would go wherever it took to bring his best friend back home. Max moved like a shadow through the trees, weaving between trunks, ducking under branches, and pausing only long enough to catch the next invisible sign. His instincts were dialed in. But this was more than training. It was personal. Every step he took was powered by the bond he shared with Officer Jake Miller, a bond built on years of working side by side, trusting each other in dangerous situations, and sharing quiet rides home after long shifts. Officer Lena Grant struggled to keep up. She wasn't new to search missions, but this one felt different. She wasn't leading, it was Max who had taken command. He paused briefly every few minutes, checking to see if she was still behind him, then darted forward again with precision. The deeper they went into Pinewood Forest, the more treacherous the terrain became. Slopes turned steeper, roots tangled underfoot, and fallen branches turned into obstacles. Still, Max pressed on. Behind them, the rest of the search team was fanning out through more navigable areas, sticking to mapped trails. They used GPS, drones, and heat sensors, but none of their equipment could do what Max was doing. He wasn't relying on signals or tech. He was following the faint scent of his missing partner, and something even stronger and unshakable. Connection, Lena's. Radio crackled to life. Unit 14. Status check. She pressed the button as she jogged after Max, still on foot, following K9. He's locked in on something. We're moving east of Sector 4. No trail markers. Copy. There was a brief pause. Copy. Stay in contact. Be careful out there. Max suddenly stopped. His ears perked up, and his nose pressed into a cluster of leaves. He sniffed, then looked up, letting out a sharp bark. He spun in a tight circle, then broke into a sprint, moving faster than before. Something had shifted. He had caught a stronger scent. Lena's adrenaline surged as she chased after him. "Wait, Max," she called, but he didn't slow down. As she pushed through thick branches, she noticed something startling. Broken twigs, scuffed dirt, disrupted foliage. Someone had been through here recently, and not long ago. She reached the top of a small ridge and spotted Max about 50 feet below, standing still in the middle of a small clearing. His head was low, his body was tense. She slid down the hill, her boots digging into the dirt, and reached his side. Max didn't move. He was staring at something wedged beneath a fallen tree. It was a torn piece of dark blue fabric, faded, dirty, but unmistakable. It was part of Jake's uniform. Lena felt a rush of emotion crash over her. Relief, fear, hope. She dropped to one knee and picked it up carefully, her hands shaking. "This is his," she whispered. "This is Jake's." Max whined softly and began to sniff the ground in tight circles around the area. He barked once, then turned toward a narrow pathway of thick brush. His tail was raised, his focus sharper than ever. He was ready to keep going. Lena grabbed her radio again. "Command, this is Officer Grant. We found a personal item, likely belonging to Officer Miller. Coordinates coming now. K9 is moving toward a new direction. I'm going with him. Copy that." The voice replied, "We're sending backup. Your way. Be safe." Max darted into the brush again, his pace quick but careful. Lena followed close behind, this time with no hesitation. Something in her gut told her they were close, and as she watched Max lead the way, a powerful thought came to her. If anyone could bring Jake back, it wasn't the dozens of people with gear and maps. It was this one dog. A partner, a friend, a hero in fur, driven by love. And he wasn't stopping until Jake was found. As Max pushed forward, the forest grew darker and denser. The sun had started to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows between the trees. The deeper they went, the less familiar everything looked, even for Lena, who had patrolled these woods before. The landscape now felt far and wild, silent, and unsettling. Branches reached out like arms, catching at her sleeves and face. The trail beneath her feet disappeared completely. Leaves crunched under every step. But Max moved as if none of it mattered. His focus had turned razor sharp. His ears twitched at even the faintest sounds, crackling twigs, rustling leaves, and his nose never left the ground. Lena glanced at her GPS, but the signal was flickering. They had crossed into a section of the forest with no marked trails, no radio towers, and very little visibility. She knew the team wouldn't be able to get here quickly if something went wrong. And still, Max didn't waver. He kept moving, as if something deep inside him was pulling him forward. They reached a small ravine where a stream trickled between rocks. Max paused and sniffed the air. He looked left, then right, then suddenly jumped down the incline, landing in the shallow water. He stood perfectly still for a moment, then barked once, short, sharp, certain. Lena slid down after him, soaking her boots in the cold water. "What is it, Max?" she asked breathlessly. Max began to circle a small patch of earth just beyond the stream. It looked disturbed, as if someone had fallen there. Lena crouched beside it and noticed broken branches, a snapped root, and what appeared to be a boot print partially buried in the mud. Her heart skipped. Someone had been here recently, and judging by the heavy drag marks beside the footprint, that someone hadn't been able to walk on their own. Max sniffed the ground, then turned and looked back at her with eyes full of meaning. He gave a low whine, then started uphill toward the opposite bank, moving faster now. He wasn't just following a trail, he was tracking a timeline. Whatever had happened to Jake had left behind traces, and Max was reading them like pages in a book. Lena radioed in, Unit 14 to command. We have signs of movement, a footprint and drag pattern. Officer Miller may be injured. Requesting nearest team to converge on my location. Max is moving northeast up the ravine. Copy that, came the response. Hold your position if needed. Back up en route. But Lena wasn't about to hold position. Not when Max was pressing forward. Not when every second could mean the difference between rescue and regret. The forest on the far side of the ravine was steeper. Max climbed it effortlessly, his paws finding stable ground. With almost supernatural ease, Lena struggled behind him, grabbing onto rocks and roots to pull herself upward. Her legs burned, and her lungs begged for rest, but she refused to stop. Halfway up the slope, Max stopped again. This time, he didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just stared. Lena reached his side, panting, and followed his gaze. At the top of the slope was a thicket of tall grass and shrubs, and just behind it a cluster of broken branches, and a shape that didn't belong. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears. Her voice cracked. Jake? No response. Max crept forward slowly, his body low to the ground. Then he barked a deep, emotional sound that echoed through the trees. Lena broke into a run. She didn't know what she would find on the other side of that thicket, but something told her this moment was going to change everything. Lena pushed through the thick brush, her heartbeat roaring louder than the wind in the trees. The shape behind the tall grass was still and quiet, half covered by broken branches and dry leaves. Her breath caught in her throat as she approached. Max stood beside her, tail still, eyes focused, as if holding his own breath too. And then, she saw it, part of a navy blue uniform, torn and stained with dirt. Officer Jake Miller lay sprawled on his side, one arm pinned beneath him, the other draped limply over a tree root. His face was pale, lips dry and cracked. A deep gash ran along his temple, partially dried but still dark. He looked fragile, almost unrecognizable compared to the strong, steady officer she had always known. Lena dropped to her knees. Jake, can you hear me? She said, voice trembling. No answer. Max moved closer and gently sniffed Jake's face, then let out a soft, almost sorrowful whine. He nuzzled his partner's cheek carefully, staying low and calm, as though he instinctively knew that Jake needed stillness and comfort. He didn't bark or jump, he simply stayed with him, as close as he could, never breaking eye contact. Lena fumbled for her radio. Command, this is Officer Grant, she said quickly. We found Officer Miller. I repeat, we have a visual. He's unconscious but breathing. He has a head injury and appears dehydrated and hypothermic. I'm sending coordinates now. We need a medevac immediately. Copy that, came the reply. Rescue team and air support en route. At 15 minutes. Keep him stable. She tucked the radio away and turned back to Jake. She pulled off her jacket and gently covered him with it, trying to shield him from the cold breeze. She didn't want to move him in case he had any spinal injuries, but she checked his pulse, faint but steady. His chest rose and fell, shallow but rhythmic. He was holding on. Lena brushed a few leaves from his face and whispered, You're going to be okay, Jake. Max found you. He never gave up, as if understanding her words. Max gave a gentle wag of his tail and lowered his head to rest on Jake's chest. The sight brought tears to Lena's eyes. Max hadn't just tracked Jake, he had stayed completely locked in, led her across dangerous ground, and now refused to leave his partner's side. It was more than training. This was love, loyalty in its purest form. Suddenly, Jake stirred. His lips moved slightly. Barely audible words came through the still air. Max. Lena leaned in closer, tears welling in her eyes again. You're okay, she said gently. We're here. Max is with you. Help is coming. Jake opened his eyes just a crack. He blinked, disoriented, then let out a weak, raspy breath. Max responded with a soft whimper, licking Jake's chin once, then lying completely still again. Lena sat beside them both, keeping watch over her friend and the dog who had become a hero. the sound of distant helicopter blades began to echo above the trees. A flicker of sunlight broke through the canopy, casting golden beams across the forest floor. The moment felt sacred, one of those scenes where time seemed to slow down, and nothing else mattered. And in the middle of it all, Max remained still and proud, as if silently promising, "I told you I'd bring him home." The hum of helicopter blades grew louder as it approached overhead, slicing through the dense canopy above. Lena stepped away from Jake and Max just long enough to wave her hands, signaling their location. Red dust and leaves kicked up into the air as the chopper hovered over a small clearing nearby. A rescue team fast-roped down quickly, medics in bright jackets rushing across the uneven terrain with stretchers and gear in hand. But despite the sudden flurry of action, Max remained perfectly still beside Jake. He lay across the officer's chest, head down, eyes alert, his breathing steady. Every now and then, he glanced at Lena, as if silently asking, "Is he going to be okay?" Lena crouched back down and gently stroked Max's back. "You did it, boy," she whispered. "You really did it." The medics moved quickly but cautiously. One checked Jake's vitals, another began to prepare a neck brace, and "He's weak, but responsive." One of them said, "Looks like dehydration and mild hypothermia, plus that head wound. We've got to lift him now." As they began to load Jake onto a stretcher, Max stood up and whined, ears twitching in protest. His body language was clear he wasn't leaving. One of the medics hesitated, unsure what to do. "He's fine," Lena said gently. "Let him come. He's part of this rescue." The medic gave a small nod. "Okay, we'll make room." With great care, they hoisted Jake onto the stretcher and carried him toward the chopper. Max walked beside them the entire way, never more than a step away, his eyes locked on his partner. Lena followed close behind, her heart still pounding. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a reunion. A promise kept by a dog who had followed nothing but instinct and devotion through impossible odds. The chopper touched down in the clearing. The rotors blew branches and dust in every direction. As they approached the door, Max suddenly jumped up and placed his front paws gently on the stretcher, sniffing Jake's face. The medics paused for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, Jake moved. His hand reached out slowly and rested on Max's head. "You found me," he whispered. Barely audible, tears filled Lena's eyes. Even the medics paused for a second, touched by the raw emotion in that single moment. Max gave a soft wag of his tail, then licked Jake's hand once before climbing into the helicopter. He lay beside the stretcher, curling up close, his body pressed against his partner's side. The medics strapped Jake in, and no one said a word about removing the dog. There was nothing more to say. As the helicopter lifted into the sky, Lena stood below, watching it rise above the trees, carrying both the man and the dog who refused to be separated. She looked down at the patch of forest they had come through, the fallen branches, the disturbed earth, the silent trees. They had witnessed something that day. Not just a rescue, but a display of loyalty so deep it transcended the limits of language or logic. Back at base, the radio transmission echoed. Through the team's comms, "Officer Miller has been located, alive." K9 Max was critical in the discovery. Airlift en route to County Hospital. Stand by for medical report. Cheers erupted on the other end. Officers hugged. Dispatchers wiped away tears. A weight had been lifted from every heart. But no one felt it more than Max, because he hadn't just completed a mission. He had kept a promise, one that only a dog could make, and only a dog would fight so hard to keep. The helicopter touched down on the hospital helipad just as the sky turned to twilight. A team of doctors and nurses rushed forward, ready for intake. But even in the urgency of the moment, all eyes were drawn to the sight on the stretcher, not just the injured officer, but the loyal K9 curled tightly beside him. Max hadn't moved during the entire flight. He stayed with his head on Jake's shoulder, body pressed against him for warmth and reassurance. The moment the medical team approached, Max lifted his head and gave a quiet, warning growl, not out of aggression, but out of protection. He didn't understand what they wanted. All he knew was that Jake was weak and needed him. "Easy, boy," one of the nurses said gently. She knelt in front of him and extended a hand. "We're going to help him, it's okay." Lena, who had followed by ground transport and arrived just minutes after, stepped in and crouched beside Max. "It's okay, Max, you did your job. Let the doctors help now." Max looked at her, eyes filled with understanding and trust. Slowly, he stood up and stepped aside, but not before placing one last lick on Jake's cheek. It was as if he was saying goodbye for now but not forever. Jake was wheeled away into the air while Max was led to a quiet waiting area just outside. Lena sat with him, brushing leaves and dried mud from his fur. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from everything they had just been through. Within minutes, word of the rescue had spread across the hospital. Staff from other wings came down just to see the dog that had led the mission. One doctor snapped a photo of Max lying on the waiting room floor, ears perked, staring toward the hallway as if he was willing Jake to return. That image would later go viral, but for now, it was simply a snapshot of silent devotion in our past. Then finally, a nurse stepped into the waiting area. She walked straight to Lena and knelt down to pat Max. "He's stable," she said softly. "He had a mild concussion, some dehydration and exposure, but he's going to be okay." Max gave a soft bark. Lena smiled, and her shoulders dropped in relief. "Can he see him?" The nurse looked hesitant, then smiled. "For today, just a quick visit." They led Max down the hallway, past rows of white rooms and curious onlookers. When they reached room 214, the door was already open. Jake lay in bed, eyes closed, a small bandage on his forehead, tubes attached to his arm. He looked pale but peaceful. The moment Max saw him, his tail wagged once, then again, faster. Jake opened his eyes and smiled. "Hey, buddy," he said weakly. Max didn't jump or bark. He walked slowly to the side of the bed, rested his chin on the mattress, and stayed completely still. Jake reached out and placed a hand on his head. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. The room fell silent. A nurse standing in the doorway wiped a tear from her cheek. Another staff member quickly stepped out of the room to compose himself. The connection between man and dog needed no words. Everyone in that room felt it, and no one who witnessed that moment would ever forget it. Jake closed his eyes again, this time not in weakness but in peace. And Max, still and loyal, stood watch. As the night settled over the hospital, the hallway outside Jake's room became a place of quiet awe. People didn't walk past it with routine steps anymore. They slowed down, peeked inside, and remembered what they had seen. Not just a rescue, not just survival, but a love so pure it brought a room full of strangers to tears. The days that followed felt like something out of a storybook, only it was all real and everyone in the hospital knew it. Officer Jake Miller's room became more than just a recovery space. It became a symbol of something rare and powerful. Nurses, doctors, and even patients began stopping by, not just to check on Jake's progress, but to see Max. The hospital staff had never made an exception like this before. But this wasn't just any case, and Max wasn't just any dog. Every morning, just after sunrise, Max would be led into room 214 by Lena or one of the hospital aides. The moment he entered, Jake's eyes would light up. It was the kind of spark that even the strongest medicine couldn't create. Max would curl up beside the bed, head resting on Jake's leg, calm and still. When Jake napped, Max stayed watch. When Jake struggled to sit up or shift positions, Max would gently move with him, tail softly wagging. His presence was quiet, but powerful. He made Jake feel safe, steady, and strong. The hospital psychologist even commented, "I've never seen a recovery move this fast. That dog's doing half our work." Jake smiled the first time he heard that. "He's always been my best partner," he said, "but I think now, he's my lifeline." By the third day, word of their story had reached the local news. Reporters began to gather outside the hospital. They wanted interviews, photos, updates. The hospital staff did their best to keep the chaos away from Jake's room, but they couldn't stop the public's growing fascination with Max's loyalty. People from all over began sending letters, drawings, care packages, even chew toys and dog treats. Children wrote notes like, "Dear Max, you're my hero, and I want to be brave like you when I grow up." Lena helped read some of the letters aloud to Jake. who often got emotional midway through. I didn't think something like this would mean so much to people, Jake said quietly. Lena nodded. It's not just what happened, it's how Max never gave up on you. That kind of loyalty. It touches something deep in people. Max didn't seem to understand the fame, the flowers, or the cameras that tried to peek through the door. All he cared about was Jake, and Jake cared about getting back on his feet, not for the spotlight, but so he could walk beside Max again, like they used to. One afternoon, a physical therapist came in with a walker and a challenge. Think you're ready to stand, officer? She asked gently. Jake grinned. I'm ready if Max is. With a bit of help. Jake swung his legs over the side of the bed. Max stood instantly, ears perked, eyes locked on his partner. As Jake took his first step, shaky but determined, Max moved beside him, shoulder to thigh, walking in perfect rhythm. The entire hallway paused to watch. Nurses came to doorways. Doctors looked up from their tablets, and for a moment, the hospital transformed not into a place of illness or injury, but into a stage for something beautiful. One man, one dog, walking together again. When Jake reached the end of the hallway, he stopped, breathless but smiling. He looked down at Max. You didn't let me fall when I was lost in the forest, he said softly, and you're still holding me up now. Max looked up, tail swaying gently, as if to say, I always will. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by awestruck faces and teary eyes, healing didn't feel like a process anymore. It felt like a promise being kept. 3 weeks after the rescue, the police department held a ceremony in front of City Hall. The entire force was present, officers in crisp uniforms, their badges gleaming in the sun. Firefighters, EMS workers, and local leaders filled the rows of chairs, but the largest group was made up of ordinary citizens' families, teachers, students, all drawn by the story of one officer and the dog who wouldn't give up on him. A large banner stretched across the stage, honoring K9 Max for unwavering bravery and loyalty. Jake Miller stood at the center of it all, dressed in his uniform, leaning slightly on a cane. The scars on his forehead had begun to fade, but the gratitude in his eyes had only deepened. Beside him, standing tall and proud, was Max. He wore his K9 harness, polished and clean, with a shiny silver badge pinned gently to the side. The mayor stepped up to the podium first. Every once in a while, he said, a story comes along that reminds us what true loyalty looks like. K9 Max didn't just follow a scent. He followed his heart. He braved the wilderness, crossed dangerous terrain, and refused to stop until his partner was found. Today, we honor not just a working dog, but a hero. Applause rippled through the crowd, and many people wiped their eyes. Then it was Jake's turn to speak. He stepped to the microphone slowly, with Max trotting beside him. The microphone lowered a little, and he took a breath before speaking. 3 weeks ago, I woke up in a hospital bed with a pounding headache and no idea how I got there. But the first face I saw was Max's. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. He just looked at me with those eyes, like he was saying, I told you I'd find you. The crowd chuckled softly, hanging on his every word. I've seen bravery in a lot of forms. Jake continued, voice steady. I've seen my fellow officers run into danger without hesitation. I've seen firefighters risk everything to save a stranger. But what I saw in Max, that was something different. It wasn't just training. It wasn't just instinct. It was love. His voice wavered for a moment. He placed a hand on Max's back. He's not just a dog. He's my partner, my friend, my reason I'm standing here today. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Then, with great care, the chief of police stepped forward carrying a small velvet box. Inside was a custom-made K9 Medal of Valor, engraved with Max's name and the date of the rescue. He knelt in front of Max, attached the medal to his collar, and gave him a firm handshake, his hand gently resting on Max's paw. Max, sensing the importance of the moment, stood perfectly still. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. News crews captured every second. But it was the silence between the applause that said the most, an unspoken recognition that everyone had witnessed something rare. After the ceremony, families lined up to pet Max. Children hugged him. Elderly visitors thanked Jake. One little Boy handed Max a homemade card that read, "To Max, the bravest dog in the world." Later that evening, back at the precinct, Jake and Max returned to their old office. A new plaque had been placed on the wall in honor of Canine Max, who didn't just protect the badge, but everyone behind it. Jake sat down at his desk. Max lay at his feet, tail wagging softly. Already drifting to sleep, Jake looked down and whispered, "We're back, partner." As the station lights dimmed and the noise faded, one thing remained steady: the quiet breath of a dog who never left his friend behind.